Today I'm delighted to be welcomed with good friend Charlie MacLean and Pete from Whisky. We are some lucky chaps today. We're going to sample a Macallan 1937 32-year-old. Now, you used to work for Macallan. I'm assuming this is still quite special, like from what you got to try when you were working with them. How do you feel about this?
I mean, this is certainly something I've never had the privilege of trying before, so I'm really excited, and I'm expecting to still be able to taste the Macallan coming through, but I'm reckoning it's going to be in a completely new way. So yeah,
Looks spectacular. Charlie, you'll have had quite a lot of old G&M style bottlings. My question to you would be, 1937. What would distillation have been like around about this period? Because I imagine not many distilleries would have even been in production.
Well, one thing I can say is that all the product, except for a parcel of casks, 20 butts, something like that, 25 butts, went for blending. Macallan ranked top class by blenders, but right through to the very early 1980s when they began to promote Macallan as a brand. The licensed bottling was done by two companies. You'll see here Gordon and MacPhail in Elgin, which of course is a long-established independent bottler founded in the 1890s, and the other was Campbell Hope and King, which were also
so they were able to essentially act as the official bottler of the single malt.
So this is,
although they're now recognised as this premium independent bottler.
Absolutely.
It's just fascinating, I think.
And this 32-year-old was bottled especially for Donini. Macallan was one of the very earliest to penetrate, along actually with Gordon and MacPhail, to penetrate the Italian market.
Yeah.
And by the 1970s, Italy was the biggest market in the world for Scotch malt whiskey. And it was very largely to do with George Urquhart, who's the owner of the chief of Gordon and MacPhail.
It ties into kind of Italian whiskey history as well. We think of Samaroli in 1968.
Exactly.
That was really when he started buying casks, and I think they talk about his story of having pick of whatever he wanted because nobody was really doing it yet.
I know.
Yeah. So this was bottled 1969. Just outrageous. I mean, it's fantastic. I've had a few bottlings from Gordon MacPhail throughout the 40s and 50s. Been really, really lucky to try some of the archive stock, but I've never had anything bottled as early as kind of the late 60s, early 70s. So
yeah.
Looks spectacular. Looks like Macallan, a modern day Macallan. Almost a ruby kind of colour on it. I mean,
I was going to say the colour of it is something else, isn't it?
But at this period, they would have had, in the 1930s, late 1930s, they had 6 stills, which is quite a lot at the time.
It certainly was.
In fact, in 1965 is when we moved to 12 stills, and now, I don't know if you've been to the recent distillery, I think there's 48. And essentially they've got land that allows them and a wall at the end of the distillery that would allow them to just continue the still room.
That's right.
It's an absolute monster of a distillery now, with a million casks on site. I think when you think of a old school premium sherry cask whiskey, you do think of Macallan.
Of course.
Now, for the viewers that might not be so familiar, I'd like to ask, it says Macallan-Glenlivet. Now, this is a reference to kind of what people used to call Speyside whiskey, and I think we still see it in Cadenheads. Are probably the only people I can think of who still use it on their bottles, but actually...
Well, a lot of distilleries pounced on the name of Glenlivet because the whiskies from Glenlivet it had a high reputation even in the 1820s. And so when the so-called Glenlivet region, now Speyside, grew mainly in the 1890s, a lot of them, Cardew, Abelard, Glenlivet, etc., they adopt it as a suffix. The owners of the original Glenlivet distillery went to court in the 1880s.
Okay.
And they got a settlement out of court that they were the only ones that could call it the Glenlivet.
The Glenlivet, which is why we see that now.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. I remember looking at a really old cocktail book, and it said, I had 2 ounces of Glenlivet.
Yeah.
And it wasn't in reference to the Glenlivet as we know it now. It was just the style of whiskey.
It was.
I think people don't know that, and there's not really much exposure for it now, apart from Cadenheads who still do it. Such an interesting part of the history. What did you do when you were with Macallan, Pete?
So I worked across in the Middle East, India and Africa.
Oh, wow.
Did you?
Yeah. And so my role was to head out to these amazing places and introduce the Macallan to new markets that were sort of coming into the luxury single malt world. So it was a very, very interesting time, and I was very lucky to be able to have tried and tasted some of the fine and rare range.
Wow.
But certainly not something from this era.
Yes.
I think it's really interesting, Gordon MacPhail bottling, talking about how all of the casks really would have been used as this fantastic liquid for blends. It's come full circle now, and Macallan are now buying casks back from Gordon MacPhail,
They are.
which is very well publicised. But these are, the Red Collection Macallan released that 81-year-old decanter, the oldest Scotch whisky ever bottled. Now, I don't know if that was a Gordon MacPhail cask, but I would certainly suspect that it must have been a Gordon MacPhail cask.
Probably was.
It's because nobody else was thinking of holding on to that stock, I suppose.
Yeah.
I think we've teased ourselves enough.
Right, come on.
I'll let you do the honours, Mr. MacLean. This is,
gosh, it makes me nervous.
Truth be told, this is actually the oldest vintage of whisky I've ever tasted. So it's a screw cap, which is great for us as well.
Yeah, that's great. It's Italian import. The as I may have mentioned earlier on, Donini, who were the importers for the good. It's a good firm seal. How generous can I be?
As generous as you want with me. That's great, thank you.
Thank you kindly.
Now, Macallan, when they started to set aside stock, they were very keen on so-called sherry wood maturation. Now, this is something of a misnomer because they were either sherry seasoned casks or transport casks. In these days, in the 1930s, it was probably a bit of both. But the more important than the fact that sherry has been in the cask is whether it was an American oak cask or a
European oak,
oak cask. And seemingly, until the 1960s, it was the transport casks were American oak. And then for some reason, which I've never been able to penetrate, they then switched to European oak for their transport casks. So we can make a guess by colour. It could be either, but by colour, it's probably more likely to be European oak. But if it's European oak, it'll be very tannic and dry. And I suspect it's going to be American oak.
Let's have a little smell, a little taste, gentlemen.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Do we have a strength?
Spot at
That's a good
43.
question. Yes, 43%.
43%.
So 43%, 32 years old, bottled 1969. Just a little bit of liquid history. The nose is big. It smells old. I think that's a very obvious thing to say.
I wouldn't
think,
say
but
that, Ross. It's quite shy for me.
Okay.
I think that
there's a bit of polish in there. See, I think
I'd
I'm
go
a
with that.
little reactive to oak and polish. Maybe a little bit licorice. I might be looking for it.
It's
It's just such an unusual product to have seen a 32-year-old single malt at that point.
it's very, very mellow. I mean, there's. I'm not getting a huge amount off the nose.
It is. It's more mellow than I anticipated. I think that I think a couple of seconds in the glass is actually opening it up really, really nicely. The furniture polish, absolutely spot on there.
That. Mm.
I'd even, we always talk about sort of one of the most sort of cliche notes in whiskey being that leather. But I think this is probably the whiskey that phrase came from.
Yeah, polished leather.
Yeah, polished leather, tannery, that type of almost slightly. There's almost a meaty note.
Definitely. Yeah, dry. The nose drying. It's almost meaty. There's not much fruit here.
No, that's surprising because in the Macallan that we're familiar with, they talk about the fruit being almost the top note.
I've already jumped ahead, gentlemen, I must admit.
And how are you?
I'm pretty happy right now, I've got to be honest. This is there is a sweetness, but it isn't fruitiness. It's almost a chocolate for me, which I really enjoy. Texture is so important, and
It has a lovely texture.
the texture is luxurious.
And as you say, It's a sweet start, and I think there's something. It's almost like orange chocolate or something like that.
Terry's?
Terry's chocolate orange, but
a dark chocolate variation. I like that.
But then there's some spice at the back, which I must say.
It's not spirit spice though, is it?
No.
That's coming from the cask, I presume.
It must do.
Because
that's usually associated with a European oak.
I mean, if you were to put a wager on this, American or European, but
I think I'd go American. Actually.
Yeah,
I think
it seems very forward thinking for the time.
Yeah,
but I suppose it's what was available.
Yeah, the nose is opening.
Yeah,
it really is.
It's a dram you need to give time, don't it? And it deserves the time in the glass just to.
And as does many whiskies, they really become, especially old whiskies. Actually, I was tasting some this week, and they were 40-year-old, 30-year-old whiskies, and they open. You need to give them time.
I see that you're adding a little bit of warmth.
Yeah, that helps as well to warm it up a bit.
In terms of a finish on the whiskey, is there anything noticeable for you gentlemen? I mean,
hold on, let's a second. I probably have to have another one.
It's one of those whiskies that I think that my instinct is to say that it swerves towards dry and then just veers off again, doesn't it? So it ends actually with quite a sweet note, but you do get the sort of coffee bitterness, then dry, then sweet, and so there's that real sort of movement within the
That's
palate.
very interesting. Yeah, it does just that.
And I like the spice. I do like the cask influence spice right on the end.
Goodness me.
It actually has exceeded my expectations. I thought I would enjoy it. I'm not that hard to please, truth be told, gentlemen. But I thought that the texture is probably what I find most satisfying, but a real pleasure to try this. I really appreciate you joining me.
Well, it's been a joy. It really has.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you very
Cheers,
much
Charlie.
indeed.
Let me just.
You can't cheers with an empty glass.
Absolutely. That's an absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, enjoy it, gentlemen. Nice little bit of history in the glass.
Still 32 years old. Gee whiz.
Back then.
Cheers.
Thank you very much indeed.
Our
It was
pleasure.
really lovely.